means to moksha according to Sri Ramana Maharshi, Yoga Marga. The term yoga and its usages are so ancient that they can be traced in the Vedic literature also. There are various explanations of this term found in the various ancient treatises. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is known as the oldest treatise, mainly devoted to the yoga practices. According to this treatise, the yoga means the restraint of the modes of mind. Traditionally, the yoga system is associated with the Sankhya system because most of the doctrines of the yoga system resemble with the Sankhya system. However, the yoga practices have been accepted by various religions and philosophical systems. The Kevala Advaita Vedanta philosophy is also not an exception to it. The discussions of the yoga practices are found in the works of Ramana Maharshi also. He has mainly explained some of the Ashtanga yogic practices which form a major part of Patanjali Yoga. At some places, he has expressed his opinions about the Hatha Yoga and the Kundalini Yoga also. Of course, these descriptions are comparatively very few. His objective is not to teach the yoga practices. He describes all these practices mostly comparing them with the practice of self inquiry. According to him, the aspirant performing any yoga practice starts with the belief that he is separate from the Supreme Being and he will be united with it at the end of the yoga practice. On the contrary, the aspirant of Gyan Marga searches the very reason of the separation. At another place, Ramana Maharshi expresses his disapproval to the suppression of the chit vrittis, modes of the mind. In his view, the mind gets controlled in some states, such as sleep, swoon, etc., but it becomes active again at the end of these states. Hence, mere suppression of the mind is of no use. On the other hand, by following the method of self inquiry, the mind is annihilated automatically in its source. Ramana Maharishi precisely describes the Ashtanga Yoga, namely the yoga consisting of 8 paths, in one of his dialogues named Self Inquiry. This description is mostly based on the Ashtanga Yoga prescribed in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. However, Maharishi mainly discussed the 3 parts of the Ashtanga Yoga in his works. They are pranayama, dhyana, and samadhi. Although he explains these methods, it is not his intention to instruct them as a main practice. He has described them mainly because he had questions about them from the devotees. Ramana Maharishi has often recommended the practice of the pranayama breath control to control the mind. He says that the mind and the prana have the same source, namely the self. The mind refers to the power of consciousness and the prana refers to the power of action. Both these parts are the branches of the original power of the self. They rise from the same place and merge also into the same place. Therefore, the mind gets temporarily absorbed into the self by restraining the prana. It is just like a bird caught in a net. Maharishi further states that there is no need of the practice of pranayama for one who can control the thoughts. The pranayama proves to be a useful aid when one is unable to concentrate the mind. The mind is forcefully controlled by the practice of pranayama, just like controlling the movement of the horse in one direction by using the rein. T.V. Kapala Shastri explains this elaborately in the commentary on the Ramana Gita. He says that Ramana Maharishi teaches the way of practice according to the eligibility of the aspirant. While inquiring into the self, the prana follows the mind and becomes restrained and thereby calm if one's mind is strong and endowed with the sanskaras of previous virtuous deeds. Otherwise, the weak mind is carried away by the prana to the external objects. Thus, the unfit and externalized mind is always dominated by the prana. The practice of pranayama is one of the useful methods to control the externalized mind. If even if so, the pranayama has the temporary effects when one stops practicing the pranayama, the controlled mind gets externalized again. Therefore, Maharishi always advises one not to get satisfied only with the mechanical pranayama, but to do other practices such as self inquiry or meditation when the mind gets concentrated by the pranayama. The temporary mind control is certainly not useful to attain the realization. It is also important to see the exact type of the pranayama recommended by Maharishi. He mostly advises to watch constantly the inhalation and the exhalation of the prana by the mind. By doing this, according to him, the kumbhaka, the restraint of the prana, is accomplished. In this way, though Ramana Maharishi sometimes suggests the practice of pranayama, he considers it as a secondary practice. The next part of the Ashtanga Yoga elaborated by Sri Ramana Maharishi is the dhyana meditation. According to him, the fundamental thing in the meditation is to concentrate on the particular thought. By the virtue of the constant meditation, other distracting thought can be kept away when one begins the meditation. All other thoughts gather together and try to remove the thought on which one meditates. Hence, Maharishi compares the meditation with the battle. These distracting thoughts can be overcome only when the meditation becomes deep rooted. Ramana Maharishi uses two illustrations, namely the flow of the ghee and the current of the water, to point out the continuity and intensity in the meditation. Here, Ganpati Muni comments that the illustration of the flow of the ghee is used to indicate the devotional and affectionate attitude in the meditation, and the illustration of the current of the water is used to indicate the purity in the meditation. Ramana Maharishi doesn't deny any kind of meditation, such as meditation on the God or on the mantra, etc., but he specifically mentions that the Soham meditation, in which the unity of the Jiva with the Brahman is imagined, is more purifying than the meditation practiced with the thought of differentiation. This Soham meditation, however, is not itself an end, because it comes under the sphere of the bhavna, thought, and the ultimate reality is beyond the mind. Maharishi therefore mentions that the meditation on the Soham thought is useful in seeking the highest reality until one indicates himself with the body. But after attaining the state of non duality, it is futile. Anyone doesn't repeat the sentence, I am a man. Similarly, it is totally unnecessary to repeat the Soha mantra when one gets established permanently in the self. Further, Maharishi often compares the meditation with the path of self inquiry. In the meditation, one concentrates on the subtle or the gross objects, unquestioning the truth of one's own individuality. However, in the path of self inquiry, one aims at investigating the truth of individuality. This is the basic difference between these paths. The objective of both these methods is the same, namely the self. However, in the self inquiry, one directly seeks the source of the subject, that is the root of the individuality, and gets merged into it with awareness. So, it is a straight path. On the other hand, the meditator concentrates on the particular objective thought, which ultimately merges into the self. The meditator tries to attain the supreme reality, whereas the inquirer directly holds the subject. Therefore, the process of meditation takes long time in comparison with the self-inquiry. The succeeding part explained by Ramana Maharshi is the samadhi. He defines the samadhi as passing beyond the Atma Buddhi, the identification of the self with the body. This definition suggests the culmination of the state of the samadhi. Maharishi divides the samadhi into two parts, the Savikalpa Samadhi and the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In the Savikalpa Samadhi, the mind is expected to be withdrawn from the external objects as well as from the internal thoughts which try to distract the mind. The mind is fixed into the self with efforts. On the other hand, in the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, one merges into the reality and doesn't become aware of the appearance of the world. When the mind constantly remains merged in the reality without any effort, it is called the Sahaj Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Ramana Maharishi in his works mostly concentrates on this Nirvikalpa Samadhi and classifies it into two types, the Kevala Nirvikalpa and the Sahaj Nirvikalpa. In the Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the objects are not perceived and the mind merges in the light of the self. However, this state is temporary. The mental and the vital activities start again as soon as one comes out of this samadhi. It is like the bucket with the rope merging in the water of the well. The bucket can be drawn out by the other end of the rope. In the Sahaj Samadhi also, vikalps do not exist, but the difference is that the mind is dead and totally absorbed into the self. This is like a river united with the ocean. This steady, unitary awareness in the Sahaj Samadhi doesn't get disturbed even when the objects are perceived, whereas the Keval Nirvikalpa Samadhi is continued only in the absence of the object. After coming out of this Samadhi, one perceives all the differences again. While differentiating the state of the Samadhi from its early stage, the meditation Ramana Maharishi says that the deliberate mental efforts are needed for the meditation, whereas the Samadhi is effortless. Further, he distinguished the Samadhi from the states like deep sleep. In these states, one merges into the self without awareness, whereas one attains the self with full awareness in the state of samadhi. Ramana Maharishi describes the Sahaj Samadhi as the ultimate state. He therefore insists that one should continue the practice till he attains the such sthiti. Furthermore, he wants the aspirant to ignore the eightfold siddhis. If one attains them while doing the practice, they are of no use in realizing the self. On the other hand, there is a danger of serving from the discipline. If one is caught in the trap of the siddhis, Maharishi further explains that the occultist who wants to display his siddhis always wants to appreciation from others. If he would not get it, he becomes unhappy, even if he finds the higher occultists. He becomes jealous and finally unhappy. Thus, he goes far away from the happiness and finally loses his path. Additionally, these siddhis come in the range of the mind and they are not natural to the self, so these can never be permanent. Hence, according to Maharishi, it is not worthy to get tempted by the siddhis. While speaking about the disclosure of the siddhis by the jnani, Maharishi says that it is not necessary that the self realized one must possess the siddhis. If one has gained the siddhis while doing the practice, he may get them after realization also. The other who has not attempted for the siddhis will not manifest these siddhis after realization. Even these siddhis can be attained after the realization also, but this is done only with the certain purpose, namely for the welfare of the people. The most important thing here is that the jnani who abides in the Sahaj Samadhi is always indifferent to these siddhis and he never gets deluded by them. Apart from the Ashtanga yoga practices that have been described above, Sri Ramana Maharshi has occasionally discussed in his views regarding the Hatha Yoga and the Kundalini Yoga also. However, he speaks about these practices mostly while answering the questions asked by the devotees who were eager to know them. He doesn't intend to teach the Hatha Yoga or the Kundalini Yoga to the aspirant in full length. On the other hand, it can be easily seen that he is mostly against all these practices owing to the complexity in their nature. In the context of the Hatha yogic practices, Ramana Maharishi mainly speaks of the pranayama. He seldom speaks of particular asana or mudras regarding them to be irrelevant for the path of jnana. Moreover, in his view, the practice of meditation can be done in their absence also. He usually advises the aspirant to watch the flow of the prana. If one is unable to do this, he sets forth some of the Hatha yogic practices of the pranayama. For instance, the paraka inhaling and the rekhaga exhaling should be done in 1 unit of time, and the kumbhaka should be of 4 units of time. By doing this, the nadis will be purified and the prana will be restrained gradually. The complete restraining of the prana is the pure kumbhaka. However, Ramana Maharishi shows the risk factor of such hatha yogic practices to the disciples. According to him, performing these practices without the proper guidance is dangerous. He compares the Hatha Yoga with the self inquiry and emphasizes the preeminence of the inquiry. According to him, the prana is held on in the Hatha Yoga, whereas the mind is held on in the self inquiry. The self can be attained through both these ways other than pranayama. Maharishi doesn't elaborate other practices seen to be prescribed in the treatise of the Hatha Yoga. At some places, Ramana Maharishi has compared the Kundalini Yoga with the self inquiry. He explains that the Kundalini Shakti ascends to the brain, the center of the Sahasra chakra, through the Shushmana nerve. Therein, the yogi obtains the bliss of samadhi, but this peace is disturbed by his inherent vasanas. So, to remove all the vasanas, he has to come down to the spiritual heart from the Sahasra through the Jivanadi, which is a continuation of the Sushmana nerve. The samadhi becomes permanent only when he reaches the spiritual heart. In this manner, the Sushmana nerve has a curve. It rises from the Mooladhara and goes to the Sahasra through other chakras. From there, it turns down and end in the spiritual heart. Thus, in the viewpoint of Ramana Maharishi, the yogi doesn't attain the liberation in the Sahasra center, but it is the heart center where one finds the ultimate peace. The jnani, however, by the practice of the Yoga Marga, by finding out the source of the mind, directly attains the heart center. This is the difference between both these practices. In this context, Maharishi has opposed the opinion of the yogis that the jiva gets separated from the supreme being and enter the body through the fontaine. According to him, the jiva is nothing else but the wrong identification of the self with the non self. It never becomes separated from the self, is the real sense of term. At one place, Ramana Maharshi has directly expressed his rejection to the intricacy of the various concepts in the yoga path. In his view, the objective of all the practices is to be free the man from the various concepts and to make him establish in the thought free state of the self. Instead of doing that, the complexity of such new concepts explained in some of the yoga practices prove to be additional encumbrances to the man. Therefore, one should proceed by the straight way, that is, one should follow the practice of self inquiry. In this manner, Ramana Maharishi doesn't reject the yoga practices but he opposes the complexity in it. Moreover, he proves the supremacy of the path or self inquiry over these yoga practices on the ground of its directness. In this way, Ramana Maharshi explains the various paths or methods while answering the questions of the disciples. In his opinion, it cannot be definitely said which method is the easiest one. The specific method is suitable for one due to his temperament, which depends on his sanskaras of the past births. So he further says that it is not correct to convert an aspirant to another path by force. It is like a car running at top speed. If one tries to stop it or to turn it forcefully, the car gets damaged. Therefore, the Guru allows one to follow his own method, but he teaches the disciple the supreme path at the right time. Ramana Maharishi discusses all these methods, but it doesn't mean that he instructs them to the disciples. It is easily found in his dialogues that he always tries to turn one's attention the subjective consciousness by using various ways, especially asking one various types of counter questions. In his view, the self inquiry is the first and the foremost method. Other paths too lead one to liberation, but they are all based on the hypothesis of the existence of individuality, which is accepted as the root of the bondage. On the contrary, one directly concentrates on seeking the truth of the individuality while following the path of self inquiry. All other methods try to solve various doubts of the aspirant. On the other hand, the inquirer directly holds the doubter and ultimately comes to know that the doubter or the questioner doesn't exist at all in the supreme state of the self, and thus, in the absence of the doubter, there doesn't remain any doubt to solve. In this way, Maharishi discusses various paths of self realization. So, to sum up, according to Ramana Maharishi, the concept of jiva lies in between the self and the body. It is the subject in the form of the I thought. The identification of the body with the self takes place owing to the ignorance. The jiva passes through three states daily. The substratum of these states is the Turyavastha, which is none but the self. The difference between the jiva and the Ishvara is seen on account of the delimiting adjuncts. They are essentially same. The jiva is intrinsically identical with the Brahman. The Ramana Maharishi doesn't regard the objective phenomena to be different from one's thought. So, in some of the dialogues, he approves the Ek Jiva Vada. Ramana Maharishi doesn't have interest in explaining the sequence of the creation. He mostly describes the simultaneous creation. The world rises with the rise of the subject and it comes to an end with the end of the subject. The phenomenal objects do not have separate existence from mental thoughts. The world doesn't exist in the supreme state of the self. Moreover, anything cannot be originated at all from the standpoint of the ultimate reality. At some places, Maharishi describes the concepts Maya and Shakti for the sake of explaining the empirical plane. Ramana Maharishi approves the traditional definition of the Brahman, namely Sachidanandam Brahma, and points out that this definition suggests the transcendence of the Brahman from the opposite pairs such as Sat, Ast, and so on. The Ishvara is the omnipotent source of the world and the Jiva, but he is not involved in the worldly activities. The Ishvara too is a mental concept. If he is seen to be different from the self, the three concepts, namely Ishvara, Jagat, and Jiva, appears on the ultimate reality, that is the self. The self is the pure I, the substratum of the I thought. The Hridaya is the seat of the self in respect of the body, but in real sense of terms, the Hridaya is the self itself. It is the source of the subjective as well as the objective thought. Thanks for watching. Bye.